What if the life you built on silence and success was suddenly interrupted by a pair of 8-year-old twins selling wildflowers in the park, twins who look exactly like your brother, the one you lost over a decade ago? Meet Andrew Larson, a brilliant but emotionally distant CEO of a green tech empire in Seattle. He's made millions transforming the world, but forgotten how to feel anything real. That is, until a quiet spring morning near Pike Place Market, when two street-savvy kids with a flower stand and eyes just like his brother's stop him in his tracks. One offers a bouquet, simple, wild, and tied with a hand-woven ring identical to a gift Andrew's late brother once made. And when the boy says, "We're just trying to help Grandma, she needs heart surgery," something inside Andrew cracks. He buys every flower, but he doesn't walk away. What follows is a journey of rediscovered family, unexpected love, and a shocking truth buried in a hospital drawer. A truth that turns Andrew's world upside down. Mia and Mason are his blood. But when a fraudster emerges, claiming to be their father, and Andrew's company threatens to force him overseas or fire him, Andrew must make an impossible choice: his career or his family. Will he walk away again, or finally fight for the one thing he never thought he'd have? Stick around. This is more than a story about flowers. It's about redemption, legacy, and the quiet strength of two kids who dared to believe in hope. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe for more powerful stories just like this. The morning breeze rolled gently off the Puget Sound, carrying with it the faint scent of salt and cherry blossoms beginning to bloom in the heart of Seattle. Spring had just begun to thaw the long gray hush of winter, and Andrew Larson welcomed the rare sunlight on his face as he jogged through the quiet streets, his pace steady, his thoughts tangled. He'd taken the long route today, away from Capitol Hill and down toward Pike Place Market. It was a detour he hadn't planned. He never did anything unplanned. But something about this morning had nudged him from routine. Maybe it was the dream that still clung to the corners of his mind, the one where Eric stood on a mountain ridge, smiling like he used to before everything fell apart. Maybe it was the ache in Andrew's chest he could no longer blame on the cold. 12 years. That's how long it had been since Eric died, since that final argument. Since Andrew said words he couldn't unsay, closed a door that would never open again. He crossed under the familiar green sign of the market, where vendors were just setting up. Fresh fish, hand-poured candles, artisan bread, the heartbeat of the city in soft morning light. He slowed to a walk, taking a breath. And then he saw them. Two children, twins, maybe 8 years old, kneeling beside a makeshift flower stand at the edge of the park across from the market. A rickety table draped with a pale yellow sheet, scattered with bouquets of wildflowers, dandelions, daffodils, sprigs of clover, and violet. Everything about the scene was fragile, from the chipped mason jars to the hand-painted sign that read, "Wildflowers for Nana's heart, any amount helps." Andrew stopped. The girl was placing a tiny woven crown of flowers on the edge of a jar when she glanced up and met his gaze. Her face was flushed from the wind, her cheeks freckled, her eyes a startling shade of green that froze him mid-step. And then the boy beside her turned. Blue eyes, familiar blue, eyes Andrew hadn't seen since— "Hi," the girl said brightly, standing up and brushing off her knees. "Want to buy some flowers?" Andrew opened his mouth, but no sound came out. His gaze fell to the delicate crown in her hand. Woven wildflowers and clovers, the same kind Eric had once made for Sarah, their old hiking guide on the Olympic Trail, the last trip before the accident. Andrew hadn't seen anything like it since. The boy stepped forward. "It's $5, but you can give less if you want. Or more. Our grandma's in the hospital." "She needs heart surgery," the girl added, her voice softening. "We just want to help." Andrew swallowed hard. "What's your name?" he managed, his voice rough from disuse. I'm Mia, the girl replied with a proud lift of her chin. This is my brother Mason. We picked the flowers ourselves, from Volunteer Park. Mason gave a shy wave, eyes still locked on Andrew. His features, sharp, too familiar, sent a chill down Andrew's spine. I know you, Mason said suddenly. I mean, I don't, but I feel like I do. Andrew dropped to a crouch, his suit pants creasing on the sidewalk. Do you live nearby? He asked gently, unable to shake the feeling that the universe had cracked open. We live with our grandma, Mia answered, but she's been in the hospital since last week, so we're trying to raise money. We don't have anyone else, just us and her. Mason looked down at the flowers. She says we're stronger than we think, but I don't feel strong. Andrew's throat tightened. The wind picked up, brushing Mia's hair across her face like a whisper from the past. Eric. These are his kids. They have to be. They have his eyes, his soul. Andrew's mind raced. Sarah. Could it be? He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out his wallet, fingers trembling. He pulled $600 in crisp bills and placed it in the donation jar. Mia's eyes widened. That's a lot. Andrew forced a smile, his voice cracking. It's for your grandma. Mason blinked. Are you sure? Completely, Andrew said. The girl handed him the bouquet with the flower crown nestled on top. Then this one's for you. It's the best one we have. He took it in both hands like a sacred object. Thank you. As they began to pack their flowers for the day, Andrew stayed crouched there, watching. Something had shifted deep in his chest, something he'd buried long ago under numbers, success, and silence. He stood slowly, still holding the bouquet, the flower crown trembling slightly in the breeze. This wasn't coincidence. It couldn't be. He had to know more, and he wasn't walking away this time. Andrew stood motionless on the corner of Pike Place, the bouquet still in his hands, the flower crown trembling gently atop it. People flowed around him like water around a stone, tourists taking selfies, locals buying fresh produce, but he didn't move. The air buzzed with distant music from a street performer and the calls of vendors inside the market, but all he could hear was Mason's voice, soft and solemn. She says we're stronger than we think, but I don't feel strong. He turned slowly, watching the twins vanish into the morning crowd, their small hands clutching buckets of leftover wildflowers, their heads close together in conversation. The image burned into his mind. Eric. That boy was Eric's spitting image. Andrew didn't believe in fate. He believed in algorithms, in results, in decisions that moved the world forward. But something about this morning, something about those kids, had cracked open a part of him he thought was sealed for good. Back in his penthouse, the modern angles of Capitol Hill's glass and steel greeted him like always, but they felt colder than usual. He dropped the bouquet on his marble kitchen island, the soft clatter of the flower crown landing beside it. He poured himself a glass of water and stared at the crown, the way the clovers had been twisted just right. He hadn't seen that specific style in years. Only one person he knew ever made them like that. She'd been Eric's world once. The two of them had been inseparable during their outdoor retreats in the Cascades. He, the reckless spirit, she, the grounding force. Andrew hadn't seen her in over a decade. Not since... His phone buzzed on the counter. A reminder. Ecotech Global Conference. Tokyo flight departs Thursday, 6:30 p.m. He ignored it. Instead, he walked to the study. His fingers hovered over the desk drawer, hesitant, before pulling it open. Inside lay a worn envelope, the only letter Eric had ever written him that he hadn't opened. It had arrived a week after the funeral, covered in dirt and rain stains from where it had been forwarded from Eric's cabin in the Cascades. He had never been ready to read it, not until now. With trembling hands, he slid the letter out. The paper was creased, slightly smudged, but still legible. Drew, If you're reading this, something's gone wrong. I know you're angry. I know you think I betrayed you by stepping away from ecotech, by choosing Sarah, by choosing the mountains. But I hope you also know I did it because I wanted to live a life that meant something. I wanted to build something that wasn't just profit-driven. Sarah, she gave me a reason to believe in more. There's something you should know. If anything ever happens to me, promise me you'll find her. She might be alone, and she deserves better than that. I was going to tell you in person. I wanted to make it right between us. I hope you forgive me. I hope you remember what it feels like to love without conditions. Eric. Andrew folded the letter slowly, each crease lined with guilt. The silence that followed was deafening. How many years had he let slip through his fingers, too stubborn to revisit the pain, too afraid to ask the right questions? He reached for his laptop. If those children were Sarah's, if they were Eric's, then he needed to know, needed to confirm what every part of him already believed. Typing felt surreal. Sarah Whitaker, Seattle. The results flooded in. Multiple entries. A florist who'd once run a small shop in Queen Anne. A few local articles about flower arrangements for hospital charity events. A bankruptcy notice dated 3 years ago. And then, buried at the bottom, a patient record. Sarah Whitaker, deceased. March 2018. Cardiac complications after childbirth. Survived by 2 children. Andrew stared at the screen, heart pounding. 2 children? His mind reeled. Mia and Mason were born the same year Sarah had passed. Were they her kids? Eric's kids? His family? He clicked on a link for the hospital record, skimming it. Children placed in care of maternal grandmother, Margaret Whitaker. That name rang a bell. Eric had once mentioned she'd lived near Green Lake. He sat back, exhaling slowly. The pieces were falling into place, and with them, a weight heavier than any corporate decision he'd ever made. Then his phone buzzed again. This time, a message from his assistant. Reminder: Board expects draft of Tokyo keynote speech by end of day. Andrew stared at it, then at the flower crown still lying beside the vase. A fragment of a memory surfaced. Eric, sitting cross-legged on a forest trail, weaving a crown just like it for Sarah, laughing, happy, alive. Without thinking, Andrew grabbed his keys. He wasn't going to Tokyo. Not yet. He was going back to Pike Place. He was going to find those children, and this time he wasn't leaving until he had answers. The morning air in Pike Place was brisk, but Andrew didn't notice the chill. His eyes scanned every corner of the park with a quiet intensity, his breath shallow with anticipation. Yesterday had left him shaken, but also lit a fire he hadn't felt in years. This wasn't about guilt anymore. It was about answers, about healing, about finding the last piece of his brother that might still be alive. Vendors were just beginning to set up their stalls. The scent of sea salt drifted from the waterfront, mingling with fresh bread and roasted coffee from the market behind him. Andrew, dressed down in jeans and a flannel shirt beneath his jacket, looked nothing like the CEO who'd been on magazine covers. That man lived behind glass walls and executive summaries. This version of him was just a brother with unfinished business and a heart full of questions. Then he saw them, 2 small figures, familiar, just beyond the stone steps near the fountain. Mia was straightening a small hand-painted sign that read, "Wildflowers for Grandma's Heart," while Mason poured water from a bottle into their tin bucket of blooms. The sight of them made Andrew stop in his tracks. It was like watching a memory move. He walked slowly, careful not to startle them. "Morning," he said gently as he approached. Mia looked up, recognizing him immediately. "You're the man from yesterday," she said cautiously, her hand still on the sign. "I am," Andrew nodded, offering a soft smile, "and I couldn't stop thinking about your flowers." Mason glanced up from the bucket, eyes narrowed. "We don't give refunds." Andrew chuckled, the boy's seriousness eerily familiar. "Not here for a refund. Actually, I was hoping I could help." Mia tilted her head. "Help how?" He crouched down, eye level with them. "Well, for starters, I thought maybe I could buy a few more bouquets. I've got a lot of offices, and not enough color in them." Mia smiled, just a flicker. "They're $5 each." "I'll take 10, he said, reaching for his wallet. Mason looked skeptical. "Are you trying to impress someone?" "Yeah," Andrew said after a pause, eyes softening. "My brother." They both paused. Mia's brows drew together. "Your brother?" Andrew looked at them carefully. "He used to make flower crowns just like that one you gave me. He taught his girlfriend how to do it once, years ago." Mia stepped back slightly. Mason instinctively placed a hand on the tin bucket's handle, guarding it. "We don't talk to strangers about family," Mason said. "That's fair," Andrew replied, nodding solemnly. "But maybe we're not strangers. Maybe we're connected, more than we know." Mia looked down at the flower bucket. "Grandma says we get our flower skills from Mom. But the crowns? She said those came from someone else." Andrew's heart thudded. "Do you know your mom's name?" "Sarah," Mia answered. "Sarah Whitaker." Andrew sat back on his heels, overcome. She was with my brother, Eric." Mason stepped forward, eyes wide. "Eric?" "My brother," Andrew said, voice nearly breaking. He passed away years ago, but he loved Sarah. Deeply." The children exchanged a look that was almost too mature for their age. Then Mia asked softly, "Are you saying you're our uncle?" "I don't know for sure," Andrew admitted, "but I think so, and I want to find out." A silence stretched between them, long, uncertain, but not unfriendly. Then Mason sat back down, pulling a crumpled paper from his coat pocket. "We don't have a dad," he said simply. "Grandma said he left before we were born." Andrew's chest tightened. "I don't think he knew." Mia pulled a little notebook from her coat and flipped it open. Inside were pressed flowers, notes about types, and taped photos. But tucked in the back was something else, something that made Andrew inhale sharply. A photograph, worn and faded, of Eric, smiling, arm wrapped around a visibly pregnant Sarah, dated 11 years ago. "I didn't know this existed," Andrew whispered. This changes everything." Mia folded the notebook gently. "Grandma says we don't need a dad. We have each other, but..." She looked at him carefully. "It would be nice to have more." Andrew reached into his coat pocket and pulled out the flower crown from the day before, delicate but still intact. "I didn't know what to do with this yesterday," he said, "but now, I think it's the start of something." Mason's voice softened. "Are you going to help Grandma too?" Andrew nodded, already feeling the weight of his next decision. "Yes, starting today." "Even if it costs a lot?" Mia asked. He smiled, eyes moist. "Especially then." From behind them, a woman in a navy coat called out, "Mia? Mason?" They turned. "Grandma!" Mia shouted. The woman looked tired, a little bent with age, but strong in her gaze. She looked at Andrew with uncertainty as she approached. Andrew stood, extended a hand. "My name's Andrew Larson. I think we have something important to talk about." The woman froze. "Larson?" Her voice cracked slightly. "Yes, ma'am. Eric was my brother." She didn't speak right away. Instead, her eyes brimmed with something halfway between shock and recognition. "I was wondering when one of you would show up," she whispered. Andrew looked down at the children, then back at her. "I'm here now, and I don't intend to leave." By the time Andrew stepped out of Harborview Medical Center that evening, The sun was bleeding orange into the Seattle sky. The air carried a wet chill, heavy with the scent of rain that had passed not long before. In his chest, something unfamiliar pulsed, part ache, part peace. For the first time in years, his mind wasn't consumed by quarterly reports or sustainability projections. It was consumed by the soft, hopeful voice of an 8-year-old boy who looked too much like his brother. Andrew had just signed the consent forms for the surgery. The total cost was over $92,000, not including post-op care, medication, or rehab. But when Mason had whispered, "She's all we've got," and Mia had clutched her grandmother's frail hand, the number had vanished from Andrew's mind like mist on the sound. Now, in the parking lot, the twins sat beside him on a wooden bench beneath a copper-roofed shelter. Mia leaned into his arm, her body weary, her hair smelling faintly of wind and wildflowers. Mason sat on the other side, arms crossed but eyes constantly drifting toward Andrew, as if trying to understand him piece by piece. "So, are we moving into your castle now?" Mason asked suddenly. Andrew blinked. "Castle?" Mia smirked. "He means your house, the big one with the garden on the roof. Grandma showed us pictures of it once in a magazine." Andrew laughed softly. "It's not exactly a castle, but yes, you'll stay with me for now, until your grandma's back on her feet." Mason leaned forward, serious. "We don't want nannies." Andrew raised an eyebrow. "No nannies?" "They smile too much," Mason muttered. "Like robots. Grandma says the good ones are hard to find." "Well," Andrew said gently, "I did hire a housekeeper to help with meals and cleaning. But as for you two, I'll be the one looking after you, if that's all right." Mia looked up, eyes wide. "You'll take care of us?" Andrew hesitated only for a breath. "Yes, I'll try my best." She reached for his hand and gave it a squeeze, so small but full of gravity. They arrived at the Capitol Hill house just before twilight. Mia gasped softly as the car pulled through the wrought-iron gates. Mason whistled under his breath. The Larson residence had once been a showroom for modern eco-luxury. Solar glass panels, a rain-harvesting garden, a koi pond that hummed peacefully under an arched bridge. But over the years, it had grown cold, lonely. A house with no laughter. That changed the moment Mia kicked off her boots in the marble foyer and shouted, "It echoes!" Mason darted toward the glass elevator, pressing buttons. "Can we ride this all day?" Andrew chuckled. "Only if you promise not to turn it into a rocket ship." Their laughter filled the space in a way Andrew hadn't realized he'd missed. Not just sound, but life. Later that evening, after the twins had chosen bedrooms, Mia selecting the one with the window seat that overlooked the sound, and Mason the one nearest the roof garden, Andrew tried to prepare a smoothie, wanting to do something simple, something human. But the blender exploded in a mess of mango, spinach, and almond milk, splattering across the counter and down his shirt. From behind, Mia burst out laughing. "You're supposed to put the lid on, Mr. Larson." He looked down at his mess, startled, and then, despite himself, began to laugh too. Deep and unrestrained. It felt foreign, like using a muscle that had atrophied. "I'm not used to this," he admitted, reaching for the paper towels. Mia took the roll and helped him wipe the cabinets. "It's okay. Grandma burns pancakes all the time. We still love her." Andrew froze at the word. Love. He looked at Mia, her hair tangled from the wind, cheeks flushed, eyes bright with amusement. Then at Mason, standing in the doorway, holding two mismatched mugs like peace offerings. "Chamomile," Mason said. "Grandma says it helps grown-ups sleep when they're too busy thinking." Andrew took the mug slowly. "Thank you." As the twins settled into bed later, Mia poked her head out from under the covers. "Will you be here when we wake up?" Andrew paused. "I will." "Even if work calls?" she asked, biting her lip. "Even then," he said softly. In his room, Andrew sat at his desk long after the lights were off. He opened his email, dozens of unread messages blinking at him from every corner of the world. Tokyo, Berlin, London. He hit snooze on every one. Instead, he opened a locked drawer. Inside was Eric's journal. The last entry dated 3 days before his death. Sarah is glowing. She says the flowers smell different this spring. I think we're about to start something big. Andrew closed the journal, his hands trembling slightly. The children, Mia and Mason, weren't just a responsibility. They were a promise, a second chance, a living echo of the man he'd never had the chance to forgive. And tonight, under the same Seattle sky that once watched them climb mountains and argue about boardrooms, Andrew whispered into the silence, "I won't let them fall." The following morning brought an unusual kind of stillness to Andrew's home. It wasn't silence. There was the hum of the espresso machine in the kitchen, the soft scuff of slippered feet on hardwood, the hushed giggles of Mia and Mason peeking down the grand staircase. But beneath it all there was something unfamiliar to the Larson estate, a sense of presence, a sense of home. Andrew stood at the stove, clumsily flipping pancakes. He'd read 3 different blogs the night before, trying to figure out how to make them golden, fluffy, and not taste like cardboard. His first batch had gone straight into the trash. The second looked better. "Are you cooking?" Mason asked skeptically from the doorway, rubbing his eyes. "Trying," Andrew replied, holding up the spatula like a white flag. "You too hungry?" Mia patted in behind her brother, eyeing the breakfast spread. "Depends. Did you burn them?" Andrew smiled. "Only a little." They sat at the kitchen island, a plate of uneven pancakes between them. Mia poured syrup too generously, while Mason scooped whipped cream with surgical precision. The conversation flowed in pockets. Mia asking if the pond fish had names, Mason wanting to know how fast the elevator could go if unlocked. Andrew answered what he could, laughed when he couldn't, and watched them eat like someone watching spring return to a snow-covered garden. After breakfast, Mason wandered off to explore the garden rooftops. Andrew stood at the kitchen sink, rinsing plates when he heard a voice behind him. "Can I show you something?" Mia asked. He turned, drying his hands. "Of course." She led him to the sitting room, where her backpack sat on the carpet. Kneeling, she carefully unzipped the front pouch and pulled out a small bundle wrapped in tissue. When she unwrapped it, Andrew saw what looked like a hand-woven floral crown, slightly frayed but unmistakably preserved with love. "This was Grandma's favorite," Mia said. "She let me keep it." Andrew's breath caught. It was nearly identical to the crown Eric had made for Sarah during their final trip up Mount Pilchuck, the one he'd crafted from wildflowers and braided with hiking twine, proud and silly and beaming. Sarah had worn it in every photo, laughing. Mia watched him closely. "You okay?" He nodded slowly. "Yes. Where did this come from?" "From Grandma's box," Mia said. "She said it was from a long time ago. A man made it for someone he loved. Before he—" Her voice trailed off. "Before he was gone." Andrew knelt beside her, gently lifting the crown. "This belonged to my brother. He made it for someone special, too." Mia tilted her head. "Your brother? His name was Eric. He passed away a long time ago. I don't talk about him much." Mia looked down at the crown again. "Maybe you should." Her words landed with quiet precision. Andrew blinked away the emotion rising in his chest and reached for the tissue. "Let's put this somewhere safe." Later that day, he found himself alone in the guest room, now converted into a temporary space for the twins. While tidying up, he spotted a canvas tote tucked into a corner. It didn't look like a child's. It was worn, stained at the seams, the leather handle weathered. Inside, buried beneath clothes and sketchbooks, was a battered notebook with a faded sticker of a blue jay. He opened it and recognized the handwriting immediately. Sarah's. Mia and Mason both kicked today. I swear I saw Eric's grin flash across the ultrasound screen. He'd be terrified, and totally in love. I haven't told him yet. He'll come around. He always does. Andrew sat down heavily on the bed, the notebook trembling in his hands. She hadn't told Eric. He never knew. Page after page, Sarah chronicled her pregnancy, her doctor visits, the cravings, the laughter, the quiet heartbreak of raising the twins alone after Eric's death. And then, wedged in the back of the notebook, was a birth certificate. Mia Grace Bennett, Mason Eric Bennett, born April 12, 2015. Mother, Sarah Lynn Bennett. Father, Eric Nathan Larson. There was no more room for doubt. A knock sounded gently on the door. It was Mason, clutching a worn copy of The Way Things Work. "Can we fix the bird feeder? Mia said you'd know how." Andrew closed the notebook carefully. His voice came quieter than he expected. Yeah, buddy. Let's go fix it." They walked to the rooftop garden together, tools in hand, clouds sweeping across the Seattle sky. As Mason handed him the screws and wire, Andrew realized he wasn't just repairing a feeder. He was starting to rebuild something much larger, something sacred. That night, as he stood at the window in his study, the journal tucked beside a photo of Eric, Andrew whispered to the darkness, "I found them, Eric, and I won't let them go." The morning sunlight filtered through the towering windows of Andrew's kitchen, scattering gold across the marble countertops and glinting off the sleek appliances that rarely saw use. But today, the room pulsed with unexpected warmth and life. Cereal boxes lined the island, socks were mysteriously left on the floor, and an open coloring book lay forgotten on a bar stool. Andrew stood in front of the blender, frowning at a recipe he had printed from a parenting blog. 3 bananas, 1 cup frozen berries, half a cup of almond milk, a handful of spinach, he murmured, looking suspiciously at the vibrant green leaves. "Spinach? Really?" From the doorway, Mia giggled. "You're not supposed to talk to the ingredients, Uncle Andrew." He looked over his shoulder with mock seriousness. "I was giving them a pep talk. This could be their big moment." Mason wandered in, still in his pajamas, rubbing his eyes. "What smells healthy?" Andrew glanced down at the blender, filled nearly to the brim with an ambitious medley of fruit, vegetables, oats, and what he thought was flaxseed. "Breakfast," he said cheerfully, despite the knot forming in his stomach. "Is that green?" Mia asked hesitantly, standing on tiptoe to peer into the pitcher. "It's a super smoothie," Andrew said with a confidence he did not feel. "Packed with nutrients. You'll grow twice as tall." "Do we want to grow twice as tall?" Mason whispered to his sister. Andrew flipped on the blender. It lasted 3 seconds. Then came the eruption. The top shot off with a dramatic pop, spraying a stream of vibrant green sludge across the cabinets, the ceiling, and, most tragically, Andrew's freshly laundered button-down. He stood frozen, dripping, blinking through flecks of kale and berry. There was silence. Then Mia burst into laughter. Not a polite chuckle or nervous giggle, but full-throated, belly-shaking joy. Mason followed, doubled over on the floor, gasping, "You look like a smoothie monster." Andrew blinked, then looked down at himself, dripping in goo, hair matted with banana. A small laugh escaped his throat, then another. Soon, all 3 of them were laughing together, tears brimming, the absurdity breaking whatever lingering stiffness had hung in the air since their arrival. He grabbed a towel and tossed it to Mia. "All right, Smoothie Captain, you're on cleanup crew." She saluted with a giggle. "Yes, sir." Mason held up a spoon with faux seriousness. "We should taste it, for science." "Be my guest," Andrew said, handing him a sample from the bottom of the pitcher. Mason took one cautious sip, grimaced, and declared, "Tastes like lawn clippings and sadness." They laughed again, and this time Andrew didn't feel like a visitor in his own house. After they cleaned up the kitchen, Mia wiping cabinets with comic intensity and Mason sweeping rogue chia seeds into oblivion, Andrew let them take over the living room. He sat nearby with his laptop, half listening as they built a pillow fort and argued over which section of couch was the control tower. His mind wasn't on work. It kept drifting back to the journal, to the truth. Eric had never known. Sarah had carried that secret with grace and heartbreak, and now her children were in Andrew's care, without ever knowing who he truly was. He glanced at them as a mason placed a blanket roof over 2 dining chairs. Mia sat beneath, crisscrossed with a flashlight under her chin, telling a ghost story that sounded suspiciously like Harry Potter. They looked safe. They looked like they belonged here. And, for the first time in a long time, Andrew wanted something more than success. He wanted to be good for them, to be worthy of their trust. A soft knock interrupted the moment. It was Gloria, the housekeeper Andrew had hired when the children arrived. She stepped into the living room, wiping her hands on her apron. "Mr. Larson, your groceries just arrived." "Thanks, Gloria," Andrew said, standing. "You can take the rest of the afternoon off. I've got things covered." Gloria hesitated. "Are you sure, sir?" Andrew smiled. "I've survived a smoothie explosion. I can handle anything." She chuckled and left, and Andrew turned back to the kids. "Ice cream for lunch?" Mia and Mason gasped. "You're joking," Mason said. "I'm not," Andrew replied, "but you have to eat it outside so you don't ruin the sofa." They ran to the patio like it was Christmas morning, barefoot, laughing. As they sat under the spring sun with cones in hand, Mason looked up and asked, "Why are you being so nice to us?" Andrew paused, caught off guard. "Because someone should have been nicer to your dad," he answered quietly. Mia tilted her head. "Our dad?" Andrew looked at them and for a brief moment considered telling them the truth. "But not yet. Let's just say I owe your family a lot," he said gently, "and I'm trying to make it right." Mason nodded slowly. "Well, I'm glad you blew up the smoothie." "Me too," Mia added, licking her cone. "That's when you started acting like a real grown-up." Andrew laughed, warm and unguarded. The smoothie may have exploded, but something deeper had begun to stir. In this house, in his heart, he was no longer a man merely doing the right thing. He was starting to feel it, to live it, to belong. It was nearly midnight when Andrew found himself standing at the threshold of the guest bedroom, now officially transformed into Mia and Mason's room, his hand resting lightly on the doorknob. The hallway behind him was quiet, dimly lit by soft sconces that hummed gently, the rest of the house blanketed in stillness. A part of him hesitated, not out of guilt, but reverence. Earlier that evening, after a laughter-filled dinner of grilled cheese sandwiches and tomato soup, Mia had insisted he read Charlotte's Web to them. Mason had fallen asleep mid-chapter, and Mia had curled up beside him, one small hand still clutching her daisy-patterned blanket. Andrew had covered them gently and left the room quietly, but not before noticing a battered leather satchel tucked in the back corner of the closet. Now, hours later, the weight of that satchel pulled at him like a tide. He opened the door with care, slipping in silently. The nightlight cast a faint glow across the room, illuminating the twin beds and the piles of books stacked neatly beside them. Mia murmured in her sleep, and Andrew froze for a moment, heart pounding, not with fear, but a strange, protective urgency. The satchel was right where he remembered. He knelt slowly and pulled it out, brushing away dust with trembling hands. It smelled faintly of lavender and old pages. The zipper protested as he eased it open. Inside, among a handful of folded clothes and a framed photo of Sarah holding the twins as toddlers, was a navy blue journal, edges worn, the corners soft from years of handling. He didn't need to read the name embossed faintly on the cover to know whose it was. Sarah. Andrew sat back against the wall, flipping carefully to the first page. July 3rd. Eric would have loved today. Mia got grass stains on her knees chasing butterflies, and Mason managed to fall in love with a rock. He's calling it Herbert. I wish I could tell Eric. I wish he knew how magical they are. His breath caught. It was the first time in years he'd read his brother's name in someone else's handwriting, and there was love in every line. He flipped forward. November 12th. Mia asked if they had a daddy. I told her once, but it's hard to explain to children why someone isn't there when they didn't choose to leave. They deserve to know someday. That Eric was brave and brilliant, and that he died before he ever got to hold them. But I worry. I worry about what happens if I'm not around to explain. Andrew blinked hard, the words blurring on the page. He could hear her voice now, measured, gentle, fiercely devoted. She'd never asked for help, not from him, not from anyone. Tucked between the pages near the back was a folded note, not from Sarah, but addressed in a different hand. He opened it carefully. If something ever happens to me, this journal belongs to Mia and Mason. Tell them the truth when they're ready. And if you're the one reading this, Andrew, then I trust you more than I thought I did. Because I never stopped believing that part of Eric lived in you. His heart stopped. He read it again. The writing matched the slant of Sarah's letters, but it wasn't part of any dated entry. It had been written directly to him, in case somehow he was the one who found it. Andrew pressed the journal to his chest, closed his eyes, and let himself feel the grief he'd buried for years. The guilt. The aching joy of a second chance. He stood slowly, placing the journal back in the satchel but keeping the note in his pocket. As he walked out of the room, a voice stopped him. "Uncle Andrew?" It was Mia, barely awake, voice slurred by dreams. He turned. "Yeah, sweet pea? Were you reading Mommy's book?" Andrew nodded slowly. "I was." Mia sat up, blinking at him in the soft light. "She wrote about us, didn't she?" "She did," he said, walking to her bedside and kneeling beside her. "She wrote about how brave and funny and kind you both are." Mia looked down at her blanket. "Sometimes I miss her so much it makes my tummy hurt." Andrew reached out and gently brushed her hair back from her forehead. "I know, sweetheart. I miss her too." "Did you love her?" she asked suddenly. The question struck like lightning, not because it was difficult, but because it was innocent and pure. "I didn't know her the way your daddy did," he said carefully, "but I respected her, and now that I've read her words, I think I'm starting to love who she was." Mia gave a sleepy nod and laid back down. "She liked you. She said you were too serious, but she liked you anyway." That made Andrew smile. She wasn't wrong. He tucked the blanket under her chin. "Get some rest, okay? Big day tomorrow." "Okay," she whispered, already halfway back into sleep. "Uncle Andrew?" "Yeah? Don't ever throw away her book. It's part of her." His chest tightened. "I promise." He waited until her breathing deepened, then turned off the light. Down the hall, as he entered his study, the note still folded in his palm, Andrew knew something had changed permanently. Sarah had entrusted him with more than a second chance. She had left behind a quiet request. Tell them the truth. And, when they're ready, he would. The sun had barely begun its rise over Seattle when Andrew opened the email that would set the next battle in motion. It was sent anonymously through a burner account. No subject line, just an attached video and a single line of text. Ask him who he really is. Andrew clicked play, his breath catching as the screen revealed grainy footage from the sidewalk outside Harborview Medical Center. The timestamp showed it was from 2 days ago. In it, a tall man with slicked back hair, dark shades, and a cigarette between his fingers was pacing, visibly agitated. Behind him, Mia and Mason sat quietly on a bench beside their recovering grandmother. The man leaned down, gesturing emphatically, almost rehearsed, then knelt in front of the children. The audio crackled, but the words came through. "You don't remember me, do you? I'm your father." Andrew froze. No. He stood up so abruptly that his chair tipped backward. His heartbeat thundered in his ears as he hit rewind. The video repeated the line. "I'm your father." He watched Mia's confused expression, Mason's wary glance. Then the man slipped something into the grandmother's hand, a folded slip of paper, before walking away with a cocky smirk. It was a setup. He grabbed his coat and keys and bolted from the penthouse. Ruth Abernathy stood stiffly at the kitchen sink when Andrew arrived at the small craftsman house she shared with the children and their grandmother. Her face was lined with worry, her movements slow. "He showed up again this morning," she said without turning around. "Name's Trevor Gaines. Says he dated Sarah briefly years ago. Claims he's the twins' biological father." Andrew's jaw clenched. "He's not. I did a background check last night. He's got a criminal record. Fraud, impersonation, attempted extortion." Ruth finally turned to face him. "Well, he's filed a petition for emergency custody in family court. Claims he has a paternity test." "That's not possible," Andrew snapped, pacing. "He's a con artist. He saw the tech conference photos, sniffed out the connection, and now he's trying to cash in." Ruth crossed her arms. "You need to be careful, Andrew. If you challenge him, everything about the twins' past comes under scrutiny, including your role. You're not listed anywhere as next of kin." "I am next of kin," he said fiercely. "Their father was my brother." A voice interrupted them. "You were his brother?" It was Mason, standing at the edge of the hallway, his small frame dwarfed by Andrew's shadow. Andrew took a breath and knelt. "Yeah, buddy. I was Eric's brother." Mason didn't speak right away. He stared at the floor. "Is that why we have your eyes?" Andrew nodded slowly, his voice gentle. "It is. I didn't know until recently. I only just found out about you and Mia." Mason looked up. "Do you think that man is our dad?" "No," Andrew said quietly but firmly. "I think he's pretending to be someone he's not." The boy studied him with thoughtful, almost painful seriousness. "Then promise you won't let him take us." Andrew's throat tightened. "I promise." By afternoon, the situation had escalated. Trevor Gaines had gone public, posting a viral video claiming that Andrew Larson, CEO of Ecotech, had kidnapped his children under the guise of charity. The video accused Andrew of using the children for publicity and manipulating court officials through power and wealth. The fallout was immediate. Ecotech's board of directors called an emergency meeting, demanding Andrew leave for the Tokyo Tech Forum within 48 hours to reassure international partners. His legal team advised radio silence. His publicist recommended settling with Trevor quietly. Andrew sat in his office at home, the journal still open. Beside him, Sarah's handwriting anchoring him to truth. He ignored his phone and pulled Mia and Mason's photos closer. A knock came at his door. It was Mia, holding a crumpled flyer from school. "There's a science fair next weekend. I want to enter, but—" She hesitated, her shoulders sagging. "It's okay if you're too busy." Andrew reached for the flyer and ran his fingers over the words. "Student Showcase. Creativity in Science. Family Welcome." "I'll be there," he said softly. "I wouldn't miss it for anything." Mia's eyes lit up before she leaned forward and hugged him tight. "Thank you, Uncle Andrew." He hugged her back, swallowing the weight in his throat. "Hey, kiddo? Yeah? I might need to do something big, something public, to protect you and Mason." She pulled away, brows furrowed. "Like what?" He smiled gently. "Like telling the whole world exactly who you are, and who I am to you." She nodded, brave despite the confusion. "Then I'll be brave too." That night, Andrew recorded a video of his own. He stood in the children's playroom, their drawings on the wall behind him. My name is Andrew Larson. 12 years ago, my brother Eric died in a mountaineering accident. I never got to say goodbye. I didn't know he had children until recently when I met Mia and Mason. They are my family. They are my brother's legacy. He took a breath. And I will fight for them, with everything I have. He sent it to his legal team, then sat down on the edge of the bed, weary but steady. The war was coming. But for the first time in years, Andrew wasn't running from family. He was fighting for it. Rain drizzled against the glass walls of Andrew's Capitol Hill penthouse, painting Seattle in soft blurs of silver and gray. Inside, the once sterile space pulsed with new life. Blankets tossed over couches, crayons scattered near the fireplace, and a pair of mismatched socks left on the stairs. The air smelled faintly of cinnamon from the apples Mia had helped him bake earlier. He moved quietly through the hall, pausing outside the guest room. No, their room now. Mason was already asleep, one arm flung over his stuffed red fox. Mia sat up against the pillows, sketching with a pencil, her brows furrowed in concentration. "You should be asleep," Andrew whispered as he stepped inside, careful not to wake Mason. "I couldn't," she said softly. "My head's too full." He pulled the desk chair beside her bed and sat down with a sigh. "Want to talk about it?" She hesitated, then glanced up at him, her voice almost a whisper. "What if that man, Trevor, comes back?" Andrew's stomach tightened. "He won't." "But what if he does? He said he was our dad. People at school asked about it today. I didn't know what to say." Andrew leaned forward, voice gentle but firm. "Mia, he's not your dad. He never was. And you don't have to explain yourself to anyone, okay?" She nodded, blinking back something in her eyes. Andrew continued, slowly. "We're going to prove he lied. But it might take a little time. Until then, I need you to know that you're safe. You and Mason both." Mia looked down at her drawing, a clumsy but heartfelt sketch of a family under a tree. 2 kids, a grandmother in a chair, and a tall figure standing over them, shielding them with an umbrella. "That's you," she said shyly, tapping the umbrella. Andrew's throat caught. "I'm honored." She didn't look at him when she asked, "Will you stay? Or are you going to leave one day too? Like my mom thinks people do when things get hard." The question hit harder than any corporate accusation ever had. He reached out, taking her small hand in his. "I made mistakes, Mia. I lost someone I loved once, my brother, and I never got the chance to fix it. I'm not making that mistake again. I'm here. For good." She studied his face for a long moment, then gave a small nod. "Okay." And just like that, she crawled under the covers and turned toward the wall, her shoulders easing for the first time all night. Andrew stayed until her breathing slowed, then tiptoed out, closing the door with care. The next morning, his attorney called. The court date had been set. A public hearing, expedited due to the media pressure and Trevor Gaines' petition. "We'll need everything you have," James said firmly. "Witnesses, documentation, DNA evidence, video footage, anything that proves your connection to the twins and exposes Trevor as a fraud." "I'll get it," Andrew said without hesitation. His next call was to Harborview Medical Center, where the DNA tests they'd quietly performed the week before had been completed and sealed. He arranged to retrieve the results in person. Then he drove straight to Ruth's house to check on Sarah, still frail but recovering well. Ruth met him at the porch with a look of cautious relief. "She's stronger today. She's asking questions now about what's happening." Andrew stepped inside, where Sarah sat in the sunroom with a blanket over her knees. Her eyes, faded mirrors of Eric's, met his with clarity and gratitude. "I heard what you did," she said, "about the medical bills, about staying with the kids. I just did what Eric would have done, he replied gently. Maybe what I should have done a long time ago. Sarah nodded. You're the only blood they have left. If it comes down to the courts, I'll vouch for you. Emotion swelled in Andrew's chest. Thank you. That means more than you know. She smiled weakly. They already love you. All the rest is paperwork. That evening, as twilight colored the city, Andrew sat at the dinner table with Mia and Mason, their plates messy with spaghetti and laughter. Mason recited a list of facts about volcanoes, completely serious, while Mia giggled at his gestures. Andrew's phone buzzed beside his glass. A message from his publicist. Breaking. Ecotech CEO accuser exposed in criminal fraud investigation. More at 9. Attached was a thumbnail of Trevor Gaines in handcuffs flanked by 2 officers outside a courthouse. Andrew set the phone down and looked at the kids, who were too wrapped up in their spaghetti sauce competition to notice. He smiled softly, letting himself feel the warmth of the moment. The danger wasn't entirely over. There was still the hearing, still media cleanup, still the board meeting in Tokyo they expected him to attend, but something had shifted. The storm had cracked. A new kind of light was breaking through. As Mason slurped a noodle and Mia reached for more Parmesan, Andrew raised his glass of water and said quietly, "To new beginnings." Mia looked up. "What does that mean?" Andrew smiled. "It means we get to start over, together." And, for the first time in years, he meant every word. The Seattle Tech Expo buzzed with energy as developers, investors, and engineers from across the globe gathered beneath the gleaming lights of the Pacific Convention Center. On the surface, it was a celebration of innovation and industry, but for Andrew Larson, it was something else entirely, a crossroads. Backstage, Andrew adjusted the mic clipped to his collar, his nerves taut not because of the keynote he was scheduled to deliver, but because of the boy waiting beside him. Mason stood in his freshly pressed blazer, holding the miniature robot he'd spent 2 weeks perfecting. His eyes scanned the crowd through a small slit in the curtain. "Do you think they'll like it?" Mason asked, voice barely above a whisper. Andrew knelt beside him, placing a firm hand on his shoulder. "They're going to love it, because you built it with your own hands, and because it's real, just like you." The boy smiled shyly, then clutched the robot a little tighter. "Okay, I'm ready." In the front rows of the expo audience sat reporters, Ecotech shareholders, and, most importantly, the court-appointed observers evaluating Andrew's fitness as a guardian. Next to them was Sarah, her health visibly improving, supported by Ruth and flanked by Mia, who wore a handmade Team Mason badge proudly pinned to her cardigan. A tall man in a black suit approached Andrew just before the stage cue. "We just got the test results," James said under his breath, handing Andrew a sealed envelope. "They're ironclad. You're their uncle." Andrew held the envelope like it might burn through his hand. He nodded once, resolutely, and then tucked it inside his jacket. Moments later, the stage lights hit. Mason stepped into the spotlight with a tentative breath, then began his presentation. "This is our Eco," he announced, holding up his robot. "It helps sort recyclable waste using image recognition. I programmed it using open-source code, and with help from my uncle, Andrew Larson." A low murmur rippled through the audience. Andrew's heart leapt. That one sentence, spoken so casually, so truthfully, meant more than any line of code or product pitch he'd ever delivered. When Mason's demonstration concluded, our Eco correctly sorting plastic, glass, and compost with cheerful beeps, the applause erupted, louder than Andrew had expected. Mason grinned, wide-eyed, and ran off stage straight into Andrew's arms. "You did it," Andrew whispered, hugging him tightly. "You were right," Mason said, breathless. "I just needed someone to believe in me." As the crowd settled, Andrew stepped to the podium. He'd written a speech about Ecotech's future, about sustainable cities and energy grids, But now he placed it aside. "I came here today as a CEO," he began, his voice steady, "but I'm standing here as something far more important, an uncle, and hopefully soon a permanent guardian." He paused, scanning the audience until his eyes found Mia's. Her small nod anchored him. "For years, I believed I could change the world with technology. But it turns out, the most meaningful change began when I met two kids selling wildflowers near Pike Place to save their grandmother's life." A ripple of recognition passed through the room. The story had already gone semi-viral, especially after Trevor Gaines' arrest, but this was the first time Andrew claimed it. "That day, I didn't know their names. I didn't know they were my brother's children. I didn't know how much I needed them, or how much they'd teach me about resilience, about forgiveness, about the kind of legacy worth leaving behind." He reached into his jacket and pulled out the DNA envelope. He held it aloft, but didn't open it. "This envelope contains legal proof of what I already know in my heart. Mia and Mason are family, and I will fight to protect them, not for the headlines, not for redemption, but because love is the only thing that makes all this matter." There was a long, charged silence, then a rising wave of applause. Outside the convention center, under a blooming cherry blossom tree, Andrew found Sarah in her wheelchair beside Ruth, the twins at her side. "You didn't open the envelope," Sarah noted, her voice filled with emotion. "I didn't need to," Andrew said gently, "but the court will, so I'll submit it later." Mia stepped forward, holding something behind her back. "We made something." She handed him a framed drawing. 4 figures: Andrew, Mia, Mason, and Sarah, standing beneath a tree labeled the Larson family. Andrew swallowed hard. "I know you're not Dad," Mason said carefully, "but you feel like what I think he would have been." Andrew dropped to his knees, gathering them both into a tight embrace. "Then I must be doing something right." Sarah placed her hand over her heart. Eric would be proud. Andrew turned to her with misted eyes. "I hope so. I was too late to fix things with him. But I won't be too late now." He stood and looked up at the pink petals drifting in the breeze. In that moment, he didn't feel like a CEO or a man haunted by regret. He felt like something better, rebuilt, redefined, reborn. "Let's go home," he said softly, and, together, they did. The house felt different now. Sunlight poured through the tall windows of Andrew's modern Capitol Hill home, not just bouncing off cold steel and glass, but warming the rooms as if it had been waiting for laughter to return. And now, it had small, vibrant, unmistakably alive. In the living room, Mason sat cross-legged on the rug, tinkering with a new robotics kit Andrew had surprised him with after the Tech Expo. Just a few feet away, Mia was carefully brushing her grandmother's hair, humming under her breath, the tune sweet and achingly familiar. Andrew stood in the kitchen, apron slightly askew, stirring a pot of vegetable soup under Sarah's watchful eye. "You're holding the spoon like it's a scalpel," she teased gently from her wheelchair. "I'm used to high-stakes operations," Andrew replied with a soft grin. "Just not the kind that can burn your tongue if you're not careful." Sarah chuckled, a sound that still surprised him with its gentleness. "You've changed. You're lighter." Andrew turned down the flame and leaned against the counter. "I think I finally understand what it means to build something that lasts." Sarah's expression turned reflective. "When Eric told me he wanted to leave Ecotech and start a family, I thought he was being impulsive, but maybe he saw what you didn't back then. That legacy isn't in buildings or stock charts." Andrew swallowed, his throat tightening. "I wish I'd seen it sooner." "But you see it now," Sarah said, placing her hand on his, "and you're doing something about it." A knock came at the front door. Andrew wiped his hands and walked over, surprised to find Ruth standing there, holding a large paper bag filled with books and coloring supplies. "Just a few things to make the transition smoother," she said, "and a couple of Mia's drawings I found at the shelter." Andrew stepped aside and invited her in. "You're part of the reason we're here now. Thank you." Ruth looked around the home, once sterile and still, now filled with signs of life, scattered markers on the coffee table, a half-built Lego castle on the floor, faint music playing from Mia's tablet. "I think they finally exhaled," she said softly. "They were holding their breath for so long." "Me too," Andrew admitted. Just then, the twins appeared at the base of the stairs, wearing matching backpacks. "Uncle Andrew," Mia called. "Can we go to Discovery Park today? It's sunny, and Grandma said she's strong enough to come." Andrew glanced at Sarah, who nodded encouragingly. "She promised not to push me uphill," Sarah added wryly. "All right," Andrew smiled. "Let's pack a lunch." As they loaded the car, Ruth pulled Andrew aside. "The court date's set. You'll need to testify, formally take on guardianship." "I'm ready," he said without hesitation. Ruth searched his face for signs of doubt, but found none. "They'll ask about long-term plans, about your work, your lifestyle." "I've already stepped down from day-to-day operations at Ecotech," Andrew said firmly. "Effective last week." Ruth blinked in surprise. "You're serious?" "I'm still chairman, but I've handed the reins to my COO. It's time I built something else." She nodded slowly. "Good. Because those two kids don't need a savior. They need someone who shows up, every day, without fanfare." Andrew glanced over at the car where Mia and Mason were buckling themselves in, giggling over a shared joke. "That's exactly who I want to be." Discovery Park spread before them in full spring bloom. Lush green trails, sea breezes rolling in from Puget Sound, and wildflowers nodding in the sunlight. They set up under a large oak near the bluff, with Sarah comfortably settled in a blanket nest of pillows. Mason wandered off with his sketch pad, while Mia sat cross-legged with her back to Andrew, braiding dandelions into a crown. "Uncle Andrew," she said suddenly, not turning around, "do you think people can choose new beginnings?" The question caught him off guard. "I think sometimes we don't get to choose how we start," he said slowly. "But we always get to choose what we do with the second chance." Mia finished the flower crown and turned, placing it gently on Sarah's head. "Then this is ours," she said, with a small, solemn smile. Later, as the sun began to dip below the horizon, casting the sky in hues of rose and gold, Mason returned with his sketch pad. "I drew us," he said, proudly handing it to Andrew. The image was simple, but deeply telling. 6 figures, hand in hand, beneath a tree. Andrew, Mia, Mason, Sarah, and, surprisingly, Ruth and Eric. Mason had drawn his late father with angel wings hovering just behind Andrew, a soft expression on his face. Andrew blinked back tears. "That's beautiful." "I know he's gone," Mason said quietly, "but I like to think he's watching." Andrew knelt down and hugged the boy tightly. "He is, and he's proud. Of both of you." As they packed up for the day, Mia tugged at Andrew's sleeve. "Can I ask you something?" "Of course." She hesitated, then said softly, "Is it okay if I call you Dad now? Or would that be weird?" Andrew didn't answer right away. His voice caught in his throat as he crouched to meet her eyes. "It wouldn't be weird," he said finally, voice trembling with emotion. "It would be the greatest honor of my life." And in that moment, as Mia wrapped her arms around him and Mason joined them, the setting sun painted them in gold, and Andrew Larson, once a man haunted by silence, finally felt whole. The courtroom was hushed as Judge Whitman peered over her bench, her expression grave yet patient. Sunlight slanted through the tall windows, dust motes drifting in the still air as Andrew Larson stood, shoulders squared in his navy suit, Mia and Mason seated quietly beside Sarah. Every breath felt sacred, an echo of the past month's agonies and joys, culminating in this moment of truth. "Mr. Larson," the judge began gently, "you seek legal guardianship of Mia and Mason after being absent from their lives for 8 years. Will you please explain why you believe you are the best caretaker for these children?" Andrew swallowed past the lump in his throat. His voice, when he spoke, was steady but tender. "Your Honor, I owe these children everything. Their grandmother raised them single-handedly since their mother's passing, and they've thrived under her love, but they deserve more. A father who shows up, day after day, without fanfare. I have realigned my life, taken a step back from Ecotech's daily operations, restructured my schedule, even sold my city home to make room for theirs. Most importantly, I have learned to listen to them, to laugh and to cry with them, to hold them when nightmares strike. I promise to honor Mia's strength, Mason's curiosity, and to nurture both with unwavering presence. I want to build our family's future together." Mia and Mason exchanged a brief, enchanted look, their first open glimpse of hope shining in their eyes. Sarah, fighting tears, reached over to squeeze Andrew's hand in silent solidarity. On the edges of the room, Ruth watched with a proud smile, her years at the shelter culminating in this moment of justice. The judge nodded thoughtfully, then addressed the temporary guardian, social worker Grace Patel, who had stood quietly behind Sarah. "Ms. Patel, you have cared for these children intimately. Do you support this guardianship recommendation?" Grace cleared her throat softly. "Absolutely, Your Honor. Mr. Larson has demonstrated consistent devotion. He's attended every medical appointment, supervised school registration, even helped Mia rehearse her violin recital. I've never seen them happier or more secure than in his care." Judge Whitman allowed a small smile. "Very well. I find that Andrew Larson has proven himself suitable and deeply committed to Mia and Mason's well-being. This court hereby grants him full legal guardianship." A collective exhale swept through the chamber before Andrew could digest the words. He closed his eyes, feeling the weight of relief as tears welled unashamedly. Mia threw her arms around his waist, Mason clinging to his pant leg. Their laughter, bright, triumphant, filled the solemn room, scattering its heaviness like sunlight through clouds. Later that afternoon, Andrew drove them to their new home, a warm, 3-bedroom house on Magnolia Boulevard, all soft blues and sunny yellows, with a garden waiting for Mia's tulips and Mason's tomato seedlings. The children raced inside, discovering cozy nooks and stashing their favorite toys in built-in shelves. Sarah hovered near the kitchen, unpacking boxes of schoolbooks and carefully arranging family photos, one of Andrew with Mia and Mason at Discovery Park, another of Sarah's beaming face beside them. Andrew stood in the foyer, gazing at the tableau with profound gratitude. The walls, once pristine and impersonal, now brimmed with promise. Family portraits, children's drawings, a hand-painted sign above the mantel reading, "Home Sweet Home." He felt, for the first time in years, that every brick and beam carried his heart. That evening, after a dinner of chicken pot pie and applesauce, prepared by Sarah with Mia's enthusiastic help, they gathered in the living room for their new ritual, bedtime stories. Mason climbed onto Andrew's lap, Mia snuggled beside Sarah, and Andrew opened a well-worn copy of Charlotte's Web. "I used to read this to Eric," Andrew began, voice husky with memory. "He loved how Wilbur found courage in friendship." He paused, looking at Mia's shining eyes and Mason's rapt expression. "And now I get to read it to you." Sarah smiled wistfully. "Eric would have adored you children." Mia reached out, touching Andrew's arm. "Will you tell us about Uncle Eric?" Andrew nodded, swallowing. "He was kind, curious, just like you two. He taught me that family is the greatest treasure. I'd like to share more stories tomorrow, okay?" They nodded solemnly, then settled into Andrew's arms as he began the tale. His voice, soft and steady, wove through the room, painting the barn and the barnyard, the spider's web glittering in the morning dew. Outside, the streetlights flickered on, but inside, love glowed undimmed. Before bed, Andrew tucked Mia and Mason into their separate beds, adorned with dinosaur prints for Mason and floral patterns for Mia. He brushed Mia's dark curls and tousled Mason's sandy hair, murmuring gentle reminders. "I'm here. I'm always here." Mia clasped his hand, pressing it to her cheek. "I love you, Dad." His throat tightened at the word, but he pressed a kiss to her forehead and whispered, "I love you too, sweetheart." As he turned to Mason, the boy wrapped his arms around Andrew's leg. "Promise me you won't ever leave?" Andrew knelt and enveloped Mason in a heartfelt hug. "I promise, not ever." Later, Andrew and Sarah sat on the front porch, sipping tea under a canopy of magnolia blossoms. The evening was warm and still, punctuated only by distant crickets. Sarah reached over, her hand finding Andrew's. "You did it," she said softly. "You became the father they needed." Andrew exhaled, eyes glistening. "They taught me how to live again." They sat companionably, letting the quiet settle around them, a testament to second chances and the healing power of love. High above, the moon rose over Seattle's silhouette, gentle and steady, like Andrew's newfound heart. He'd built an empire once, but now he understood that home was the most precious legacy of all, and as he listened to Sarah's soft breathing beside him, he knew that at last every brick, every dream, and every human heartbeat had found its perfect place.